What a great turnout. We were worried. This is a really good turnout. I gotta tell you.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, you should be.
Good job, Dean. Good job. Good job. Yeah, good job. Good job. Isn't it wonderful?
Just look the same way it looked when you were here.
I was gonna say. I get to see them in other rooms.
It's the same room, but they changed up the chairs.
So much.
Board.
I know. Oh,
Only thing that's the same is I think that pole was still in the middle there.
Oh my God! Like the sin of the century! We're all going to hell. I know. They do.
This must have been a command performance. Look what they got up in here.
They don't want you on right phone. All the things.
That's right. We can't have an empty room. Everybody came.
I'm so glad you're doing this together.
My daughter is the youngest.
Thank all of you.
It's our pleasure.
Again?
We appreciate the invitation. And thanks for the briefing. That was nice.
They did, I think they did one or two of these when I was in high school. I can't remember anybody ever showed that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Davis, and I am the president of the Black Law Students Association. On behalf of BALSA, I would like to thank all of you for attending our lunch panel today entitled The Shifting Landscape, Civil Rights in the Law Over the Last 50 Years. On today's panel, we have 4 very accomplished Duke Law graduates who have experience in all aspects of the law. First, Barbara Arnwine, class of 1976, is the president and executive director of the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. She is internationally renowned for her contributions on critical justice issues, including the passage of the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1991 and the creation of the 2011 Voting Rights Map of Shame. Next, Karen Bethea-Shields, class of 1974, became the first female judge in Durham County and the second African-American female judge in the state of North Carolina in 1980. During her tenure, she instituted the Probation Challenge Program, which required that juvenile and adult offenders obtain their GED as part of their probation. Currently, she is a solo practitioner with a focus on criminal law, civil rights, and social justice. Paul Brathwaite, class of 1996, is a principal with the Bethesda Group, a government affairs and public relations firm in Washington, D.C. He is the former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus. During the Clinton administration, he served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor for the Employment Standards Administration. And lastly, we have Hezekiah Sistrunk, Jr., class of 1982. He is a national partner and president of the Cochran firm, where he specializes in complex litigation. He has been named as one of the top 100 lawyers in the state of Georgia by the National Trial Lawyers Association, and he was also inducted as a fellow into the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, which only selects lawyers who have demonstrated excellence in courtroom advocacy throughout their careers. I will now turn the program over to Dean Levy, who is today's moderator.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, panelists, for being here. It's wonderful to welcome so many distinguished Duke Law alumni back to the law school. So 50 years may seem like a long time to some of us and a short time to others of us. It is part of the university's celebration of the admission of African American students to the undergraduate programs that we consider that this is 50 years, that the time clock runs from this year. But actually, the law school was first to integrate. It was in 1961 that David Robinson II and Walter Johnson Jr. came to Duke Law School, 1961. So in one sense, it's a long time ago, and in another, it's not a very long time ago, and it's somewhat shocking. So I've asked our panelists to help us sort of remember what Duke Law School and what Duke University was like during the time that they were here, like from the point of view of racial equality and what they experienced when they came to a very different university and city of Durham. So why don't we just march down the panel, and my very good and distinguished friend, Barbara Arnwine.
Hi, thank you, Dean. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here. I am delighted to be able to talk about this subject. The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law was founded in 1963, so we have been celebrating this entire year of the various, 50th anniversaries of major civil rights milestones. Indeed, I wrote an op-ed that was published in the Washington Post, full page, on the importance of 50th anniversary events this year, back in February. And what I believe, when I was at Duke, I worried for the future of the school at the time that I was here. It was a very different era, admittedly in the 70s. It was a different era for women. It was a different era for African Americans. I remember that, some of us women would find notes on our lockers that would tell us things like, you're too pretty to be in law school. You could get married. Absolutely. I'm really serious. It was like a daily occurrence. And it was nothing like defending your presence, right? So it was very different, in many respects than what law schools are now, where women are so dominant throughout the entire, university systems throughout this country. And it's, and I like knowing that Karen and so many of us who, came through that period, we were trailblazers. And sometimes we weren't sure if we were blazing the trail or the trail was blazing us. But I will tell you, it was a really important fight. And I think that that obviously things have changed and things sometimes are the same. I always remind people that racial progress is not linear. Everybody thinks that, you start from point A and you end up at point Z, and that you have a line of progress. But the reality for racial progress is that it's zigzag, and that you make significant progress, and all of a sudden there's backlash, or there's retrogression, and so progress can go backwards. And that what's important is that the only thing that keeps the progression, in any kind of linear way is the fight that people do. It's the energy that people put in to making sure that the pathways are moving forward. And that's why, I really respect, what Dean Levy has been doing in making sure that there is purposeful determination about addressing the issues of diversity, addressing the issues of public interest and service, addressing the issues of civil rights. I love that, because that's the only way you do it, by, affirmative, determined, purposeful, dedicated action. And there's nothing to substitute for it. And because, as we know right now in our nation, with all of the progress that's been made in the last 50 years, we're nevertheless in a zig and a zag at the same time. So on the one hand, we got President Obama, sitting at the White House, Attorney General Eric Holder, my man. You have all of these amazing people like Jackie Berrien over at the EEOC, and Tom Perez now heading up the Department of Labor. So you got these amazing examples of great progress. And while they're sitting there, we're facing, even in this state, some of the worst voter suppression this country has ever seen. So I think, that's the realities. And the only thing, my advice to everyone always, is that when you look at any situation, any structure, that if it doesn't look like this room, if it's not diverse, if it's not inclusive, then the first question you always have to say is, what's the barrier? What are the barriers? What can I do about changing them? And that I don't rest until the room looks right. Thank you.
Thank you. Hezekiah, 1982.
That's right. Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much, folks. I'm really happy to be here. I'm an 82 grad of Duke Law School. I came to Duke in 1982. Quite frankly, there was no real vision as to where I was going to go after I left law school. And I suspect there are a lot of students who came to Duke like that. I just knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I came from a family in South Carolina that was involved in its own way in the civil rights movement. And I knew that was going to be something I wanted to do ultimately. But Duke was not a school that prepared you for that back then. And I don't know whether it is now, but it wasn't then, for sure. It was a school at that point that sort of prepared lawyers to sort of move on to Wall Street, to move to corporate kind of firms, the big defense firms, which is a great foundation to do whatever you're going to do in the world. I did that. I left here and went to one of the largest litigation firms in the Southeast in Atlanta, and quite frankly thrived there because of my experiences at Duke. I became a young, like you are, Paul, a young partner at a majority firm in Atlanta, and then decided, wait a minute, I'm experiencing and observing what Barbara Arnwine just said. I'm looking at the world, and it's not quite right. So I diverged and went out on my own and did something different, and decided I'd go out and create my own bully pulpit to see if I could foster and create change in the world that I lived in. I'm a litigator. I'm not like these guys. I'm actually a trial lawyer. I've tried over 300 cases to verdict. For people who don't know, for 30 years, that's a lot of trials, folks. That's a lot of trials. And I've won a lot of cases and lost a few. But you have to figure out where you stand in the world. And my point is, if you look in the world and you see, I'm echoing what you said, Barbara, and you see things that need to be changed, my only admonition to all of you is, you're at one of the best schools in the world that gives you the foundational elements to go out and create that change. There's some great minds in this room, and some great minds that left these rooms. I guess, was it across the street then? Where was it? That left those rooms. So my admonition is to go out and look for things that you can change. Don't sit back on your laurels and think the world is okay, because it's really not. We've gone a long way. We've done a lot of good things in this country. Looking at this room, I'm emboldened. My spirit's emboldened by just looking at the room. And I'll say this, and I'll be candid. I kind of told the dean before we came out here that one of my problems as a trial lawyer is I'm an advocate for transparency. I like for people to be forthright and honest. If you're not that way, the jury system doesn't work. It works when both sides are fair and transparent and let the jury decide things on the merits. But when I was here, if I came into a class like this, you remember this, Judge? You would never see this picture, Dean. And it emboldens me. I'm excited. I'm excited about what I see here. I'm excited about Duke. I'm excited about the class, the class that I see today, at the students that I see. And this is an example of true progress. But it's just like our culture, it's just like our society. We can't stop with this. We really can't. When I was at Duke, there were 7 minority students in my class. There were, I'm sorry, 8 initially. There were 4 men and 4 women. And when I graduated, there were 7. 3 men and 4 women. And in our early discussion, somebody said, how many minority students, males, are there in your class? And somebody said, it's still 3 in the 3 L's. While we've made progress and the room looks great, but like you said about the zigzag, we're still where we were back in 1982 and 74 and 76. And I'm impressed to be a Duke grad, and happy, particularly right now, to be a Duke grad because of that guy.
That's right.
Because he's reaching out, trying to change the entire landscape of what Duke's about. And I can say that not just in Atlanta, but other alums that I talk to around the country. He's reaching out to try to expand the scope of Duke, make it look more like America. And that's a good thing. And that emboldens me. And I'll stop, because I can get to talking about this, and I'll be here all day. But that's enough of my preliminary comments about this. I think we're in a good, we're in a spot in American civil rights where we need to be vigilant. We've made a lot of progress, but we can't sit back and rest on our laurels. And we can talk about that some more today before we're done.
Judge, the 1970s.
Hello. I am by nature a trial lawyer.
Uh-oh. I knew that was coming.
I was a sitting judge for 5 years in Durham County, but I am now doing what I love, and that's practicing law.
Yes.
I came to Duke with a vision. I wanted to help poor people and black people. That was my vision when I walked into Duke Law School. It was a big school, Dean. There weren't very many people that looked like me when I came. And in fact, me, Evelyn, and Brenda were the first black females to come to Duke Law School. And the very first day I came and I had some of the books that you all have to carry, and some of the 3Ls that you call them now, 3Ls, we call them third-year law students. Look, they were laughing at the 1Ls, first-year law students. And I was getting ready to go in the library, and the guy looked at me, he says, and I definitely feel sorry for her. That was my introduction to Duke Law School. But being me, I took that as a challenge. And what I said to myself was, if Nixon can graduate from here, I can too. I'm sorry. Hey, you asked me to come. I never thought I'd be sitting talking to students at Duke Law School, and I was so happy to get out. Oh, yes. However, being very serious, Duke prepared me for being a trial lawyer, for doing anything I wanted to do in law. My father told me, as long as you have it up here, nobody can take it away from you. So that's what I'm telling all the students here. Don't let anybody make you doubt yourself. Like when I walked into court and the judge looked at the DA and said, "Is she a lawyer?" when I asked to approach the bench. And the DA said yes. He thought I was my client's wife or the social worker or whatever. And then when I went on the bench, it was a challenge because people think you have to be twice as hard as a man, you know, in order to be a good judge. And fortunately, that wasn't difficult. I have some new best friends, Dean, that I came here with. My new best friends are the governor of this state and his friends in the General Assembly. And they're my new best friends because it makes me understand that you know we still have a fight ahead of us. We cannot rest on our laurels, and we have not overcome. W.B. Du Bois put it well. He said, "The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back toward slavery." We are in a situation now in our society where we have a beautiful constitution. Unfortunately, it's carried out by men who are not perfect. And therefore, you as lawyers, future lawyers, and as law students are going to make sure that our Constitution really does what it says it needs to do for all people. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, you are the baby in this group. 1990s.
Thank you for inviting the baby to the adult party. I had a great time at Duke. I usually tease when folks ask me about my experience, and I say I went to the public policy school and got a master's before I came over to the law school. And I usually tease folks and say, and not in this order, I usually say I got 2 degrees. Actually, I say I got a beautiful wife, 2 degrees, and a whole bunch of debt from Duke University. But on the last point, I knew that it wasn't necessarily I was taking on debt. I was making an investment, and I was making an investment, or my parents were making an investment in me. That if you got this, and my mother and my grandmother used to tell me that, you know, whatever you do, do it to your best of your ability, and go to the highest that you can go. And I always wanted to be a lawyer, and I told my grandmother I was going to be a lawyer, and so I came to Duke and became a lawyer. You know, when I was here, a lot of the things that are at you all's disposal were not here, like this classroom with the cameras and the nice seating and the places where you can plug in laptops and the like wasn't available. The technology wasn't there. Just think about that. I mean, I'm 1996. There was no BlackBerry. There was no iPhone. There was no internet. There was none of those things available. We actually really had to go to that library and go in the stacks and find where the cases were, and that taught us something. And it was it was very good. So I spent 5 years here. I mean, I sort of grew up at Duke and learned a lot and had lots of experiences and exposures that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And when Karen and Hezekiah and Barbara were sort of talking, it sort of dawned on me again that, you know, in that 50 years is really just one generation or maybe 1.5 generations of African Americans at this university, which is not a lot in the grand scheme of things at all. You know, we don't have, African Americans don't have the ability to be like the Kennedys or the Bushes and say that my great-great-grandfather went here and the like. I mean, it is now coming to the time where you can say that maybe my son or daughter is going to law school, but I'm reminded of a story. So I'm in politics now, and I do political consulting and the like, and one of my favorite members is Congressman Elijah Cummings from Baltimore, who is also a lawyer, and won a special election while I was here at Duke in 1996. And he tells a story of when he was being sworn in by former Speaker Newt Gingrich. His dad was up in the gallery watching him being sworn in on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, and after the event was over and his dad came down, his dad had tears in his eyes, and he had never seen his father cry. And he asked his dad, he says, "Daddy, why are you crying? I mean, why am I seeing you for the first time here in the United States Capitol crying?" And he said, his father paused and says, "Now I know what I could have been had I been given the opportunity." When you think about that statement, where his father basically now sees his son become a member of Congress, but knows in his heart that he never had the ability to be able to run for Congress, didn't even have the right the ability to vote when he grew up in South Carolina. He had to count the number of bubbles on a bar of soap. That was his frame of mind. And it's hard for people to understand or believe that that was the case. But that little small anecdote just tells you how much, as the zigzag we've talked about here, that the country has gone through. But the constant, though, and I'm an optimist by nature, is that the law is the law. And the people in this room and the people outside of this room in our democracy get to decide what the law is. And if we don't like the law, we figure out ways, whether through our government or whether through the judicial system, to change the law. And that's what you all are learning. And every single one of you in this room can be that change, will be that change in whatever sort of sphere that you choose to go in.
So that's great. Here's an unfair question. You know, I think it's Yogi Berra said, this business of making predictions is very difficult, particularly about the future. So what do you think 50 years from now? What will Duke be like? What will the country be like in terms of racial equality? What do you think?
Well, you know, having traveled, you know, around the world and analyzing, you know, racial structures in various societies, there's a couple of things that, you know, I've concluded. One is that numerosity does not equal equality. So the fact that we will have significant demographic change in this country does not mean that the plantation nature of the caste system that exists around race in our country and color will not cease to exist. It can, however, but it will not do so unless, you know, we as a country really adopt and speak and believe in a different set of values. You know, I think it's, when I was in South Africa, after Nelson Mandela was freed from, you know, 1994, you know, through 1995, 1996, when I would visit, and I still, you know, have the pleasure of visiting the country as difficult and troubled as this transition has been. But one thing that really struck me was when they were preparing for the first elections, where this black majority for the first time, have the ability to participate freely in elections, that you could go anywhere in that country and hear the same mantra around the vision for the future of South Africa. And people would openly say, the new South Africa must be a country that is gender equal, that is multicultural, that is multiracial, and that believes and fights for economic equality for all. That was their mantra. And it was constant. And everyone had that ability to, from the poorest person to the richest person, from the children in the streets, you could just hear it constantly. You know, that we won't be a sexist nation, we won't be, etc. That kind of idealism is what I worry about has waned in America. That kind of commitment to a value of those kinds of, values around equality and around social change are critical. I mean, if they're not imperatives in the society, if they're not imperatives within institutions within societies, then change becomes a whole lot more difficult. That doesn't mean that there won't be a Fannie Lou Hamer. That doesn't mean that there won't be a Rosa Parks. That doesn't mean that there won't be a Martin Luther King who will arise and will challenge structures, but it just means it's harder. I was taken this weekend. I do a lot of tweeting. I'm I'm one of them.
Tweeting wasn't here either in 1996.
That wasn't here either.
Yeah, right. That's right. And a lot of Facebook and then a whole lot of other social media and other kinds of media. And the one thing I noticed this weekend was the article that the Black Enterprise magazine issued, and I tweeted it all over the place, and it got heavy retweeting. And that was about the fact that there are 75 major United States corporations on the top 200 that have no blacks on their boards. None. Zero. And it is telling who the companies are. They are the companies that we wear, like Nike. They are the companies that we all subscribe to, their services. And it was telling, because you look at that and you say, here is if you really want to measure where we are, and, you can do all the indexes. I mean, I live in this, database of, census data, et cetera, always measuring social progress. And I recognize that nothing tells more than the economic status. And economic status has a lot to do with how far, integration has really come, and the fact that the margins around economic status have not moved at all substantially for African Americans in this country for the last, Claude Anderson will say last 100 years. But there was, a few periods like in the 70s and in the 80s where, no, not 70s and the 90s under Clinton, where there actually was, some movement in those measurements, but they've gone back significantly. So I think, it depends, Dean. There's a new book out called Blurred Lines that is odd because it's meant to be positive about America's racial future. And basically it says that America's going to have a huge multiracial middle that is going to, this is the prediction in 50 years, and that it's going to have a smaller but stagnant group of people at the bottom, mainly based on race, blacks. Then it says that at the top, there's going to be a white elite. And the basic conclusion of the book is that because the multiracial category and in the middle will be so large, that's progress. I'm going, really? Really? I mean, is this what we're fighting for? Really? So I just think that, we have to be very deliberate and very clear. I mean, there's nothing like vision. You can have all the talent in the universe, all the skills in the universe, all the drive, all the determination. But if you don't have vision and you're not clear about what that vision is, what you really want, then you end up with the kind of morass and confusion about post-racial and all the rest of this that this country is in. So I think it's very important that we in this room, we throughout this society, take up a clear vision of an America that is radically different than the vision that so many others have. Thank you.
Pretty good opening statement there.
Yeah, she should be doing the close as well.
Hezekiah?
Instead of public, you should have been a trial lawyer.
I am. That's all right.
No. I mean,
I
like
supervise.
Every day.
I know.
Every day.
I supervise
every
a lot.
day. A trial lawyer. I know what you do, but I mean every day with that kind of presentation. Wow. Quite candidly, it's a difficult question to answer because you kind of look at it panoramically. But we have the benefit of looking backward in time and knowing what happened over the past 50 years. And, the hope that we all had, even as a young man, in 63 and 64, I was a younger guy then. I'm kind of older than my law school graduation date suggests. I did some other things before the law. I would have envisioned that the world would be where Barbara says it's going to be in the future already, that we would have been past where we are now. We would have been more integrated in our culture. We would have been more sort of multicultural, more economically equal than we are now. And what you learn over time, and I think Martin Luther King was trying to get to this before he was assassinated, is that the true foundational basis for us getting civil equality and other things is going to be economic equality. And until we find a way to make the laws of this country operate so that everybody is on the same playing field economically, same opportunities economically, wherever you are in your world, we're not going to have true equality. I mean, that's just the way it is. We're in a culture that's based on economics. We're in a culture that's based on money and finances. And if you don't integrate those two things together, we're never going to get the equality that the law envisions. Now, what's great about our country, and like you, Bob, I've traveled all over the world, either on cases or doing other kind of benevolent stuff, is that we have, I think, the best Constitution on the planet. It is unbelievable, the Constitution that we have in this country. But the Constitution doesn't work, and one of you guys already said this, unless we get people who have vision and would do something to make it work. And our future is in the hands of not old heads like me, it's in the hands of the folks sitting in this room. And what's good about being on the ground trying cases, as we've done, is that you recognize that changes in the law that leads to civil justice and civil and economic equality don't just happen at the top. They don't happen just in Congress. They don't happen with someone passing a bill. Trust me, you pass a bill and it means diddly squat. You know why? Because somebody comes right behind you through either other legislation or litigation and cut the doors off of it in a second. And it's going to be guys like you and folks like me who have done this for 30 plus years, fighting to make sure that you get true social equality through avenues of justice and other things that you can't get by just sitting down saying, oh, wait a minute, we got a great Constitution. We've got some great laws that Jesus passed in 64. We got great laws that she helped pass in, 91 or something like that.
Still passes.
Right, in 91. And as soon as you pass the laws, what happens? Right. Somebody comes right behind you and cuts the bottom out of it. And that's where you guys come in. And that's where I see our country sort of moving forward. That's why I said I'm emboldened by looking at this class, this room, and seeing the faces here, bright-eyed, kind of looking like, oh, man, really excited. And I hope that's real. I hope that's not just put on pretense for us. But I hope these folks can look around and see, wait a minute, this law school class looks like what America should really look like. And I hope in 50 years, it looks even more like what America looks like. We're changing as a country. We're changing as a culture. We're changing as a society. As much as people don't want to hear it, we're becoming more brown, not black, but just more brown, more blended. I think you said it at lunch, Dean. We're becoming more of a blended culture, blended society. And I think people like you in this room will help us sort of create that perfect world that we anticipate can happen in the next 50 years. But it's going to be hard, Judge. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really, really hard because as quick as you get some success, you're going to find somebody who's really, really smart, another smart lawyer who's going to come in and undermine the success. I mean, we can sit here all day and go over the bills that I know has been passed through Congress nationally, locally, state by state, where I fought in my own practice to sort of put them back where they were when the bills were passed. And we'd be here months of Sundays figuring out what was done to undermine the social and civil justice that was acquired through legislation. So it's going to be you guys that keep this moving forward. And our future is in your hands, quite frankly. It's in the hands of the folks in this room. I'm at 63. I'm kind of old. I've kind of done my bid. And my guess is in 3 or 4 years, I'll be of counsel someplace and on somebody's board, hopefully one of those boards. help steer them in the right.
I hope so.
Steer them in the right direction.
Right.
But that's what I think. I think it's hard to predict, but I feel good about it. I feel good about it not just because I know we have a great Constitution, a great foundation. I feel good about it because I know that the folks in this room and the bright minds that are created by Duke will kind of help folks like Barbara and the judge and myself and Paul, who've sort of got the ball rolling. They'll push it forward into the future, and we can do something substantive. Because, you know, the hardest thing is to recognize that folks don't give up what they already have without a fight. They won't. And if you think civil rights is not about someone perceiving that you're taking something from them that they perceive they have a right to, you are absolutely wrong. And they think it's theirs, and they will fight you for it. And I say they, I'm not identifying any particular group. I mean, anybody who thinks you're taking something from them, they will fight you to the death for it. And it will take someone who understands how the system works, who has the diligence and the dedication to work hard to make sure individual grievances are addressed, to create the change and sustain the change that we have. Because it's not about big omnibus bills. It's about day-to-day fighting to make sure that when that kid is denied opportunity to go to law school and it's not fair, some lawyer like this judge steps up to the plate and fights for her, and it becomes a bully pulpit to embolden what the law means, overall what the law means. And you don't see that when you're at Duke. I didn't see it as a kid when I was there. I see it now. You know, I take one point of permanent privilege, Judge, just 1 second. I didn't say it before, and I'm going to say it because looking at this room, it really makes me feel good. When I was at Duke, one of the things I felt most than anything else is sometimes I felt kind of a sense of isolation. You know, as a young black student, 3 of us, black males at Duke, and all the folks out there. There weren't a whole lot of white women either, by the way. There was mostly white males, that's in all candor. What I've learned since I left Duke, though, is this. Some of the most important things, one of the most important things you will ever do in your life, trust me on this, is to create connection with the people that are sitting next to you. It doesn't matter whether they're green, or orange, or white. Because ultimately, that's how we're going to change it. We are going to change it. But the relationship starts now. It doesn't start 20 years from now when you're an old head trying to call up somebody and say, oh, hey, by the way, David, remember me from Duke? I need you to help me on this big civil rights case. It doesn't, no, it starts today. So in the earlier session, I just want to, my admonition is reach out. You seem to have done a good job of that, Paul. Reach out and become friends. Just know people, touch them, and understand that your future as a lawyer doesn't start after you finish law school. It starts as a 1L, or as you say, a first-year law student. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge?
One of my favorite songs is by James Cleveland, I Don't Feel No Ways Tired.
All right now.
I'm not going to sing, don't worry. And that's where those people that care about civil rights and social justice in these United States have to sing every morning when we wake up. There was a lawyer here in Durham named Buddy Malone, one of the best trial lawyers I've ever seen.
Yes.
And one day I said something, he says, well, you can't get tired until you die. And so that's where we are, Dean, as far as what's going to happen in the next 50 years. And I look at it this way. If we don't make some changes, we're not going to be too good in the future. However, I want to talk a little bit about what Barbara said, and I want to be crystal clear. This is one of the most important things you'll hear today. She mentioned the word caste system. And some of you probably went over your head, but that's where I think all of our trouble starts with this country because we don't understand, don't take the time to know the history on the caste system in our country. We hear about it in the words of slavery, and when you think about slavery, you only think about abuse and inhumanity. You never think about the words, adjectives, pride, and faith. But that went along with the system of slavery, too, because if it had not been for pride and faith, slaves would not have been able to exist or survive. And what I see, Dean, as far as the next 50 years are concerned, if we don't take care of the caste system, and the caste system is called by different names now. It's called school to prison pipeline. It's called for-profit prison. It's called taking away the rights of those people that are convicted of felonies. Now think about it. Little history lesson here about the prison system. When I went on the bench way back in the 80s, we wanted to do something called alternatives to incarceration, and at that time there were sociological and criminological reports that showed that in the next few years prisons would be isolated, that we wouldn't need them anymore. That was back then. Okay?
Yep.
And so they want to do alternatives to incarceration, and one of the things to that report was dealing with the history of incarceration. That went back to slavery. And went back to what they did in order to control the slaves after they were freed, and that was making sure they went through the criminal justice system. You know, we're doing the same thing today. We just call it something different, that caste system. And so you as lawyers, future lawyers, must look behind all the laws that come down by anybody and try to figure out what is the agenda, what's the history behind these laws. Now look at the effect of having certain criminal cases that are called felonies. What happens if you're convicted? You can't get housing, you can't get public assistance, you can't get into schools, and so there goes your education, economics. And so those people are controlled, and you're controlling that group, you're targeting that group. And so, as someone said, there's nothing coincidental in the world. And there was a minister, I think it was David Jeremiah, I think I have the right minister, says, coincidence is God's way of being anonymous. But that's the good coincidence. This is not the good coincidence. This is intentionally controlling certain segments in this population. And so, therefore, when we look at certain types of laws, we have to be sure we understand that criminal justice is part of civil rights, number one.
That's right.
And number two, that if we don't make some changes there, we will never reach that 50-year period when we have equality and justice and freedom and fairness for everyone. So you as future lawyers, start being historians right now and start looking behind all the laws and see if there are any hidden agendas there that try to take away the rights of certain groups but call it by different names. And so I'm optimistic too that you will have enough young people in here to stand up and say that's not right and we're going to do it the right way. We don't need a certain color, a certain gender, in different positions. We need people with the right heart. That's number one. And once we get the people with the right heart, knowing that they should try to include everyone, and this country has a living document called the Constitution that didn't include me when it was first written. And we have to be straight up about that. But notwithstanding that, my ancestors and me are going to keep on fighting until it does what it said it's supposed to do.
Paul? Can I just concur with the judge's opinion?
She'll let you.
I'm just going to concur.
I
think everything that needed to be said has been said. Now, everyone didn't say it, but I concur.
Excellent. Well, unless there are any parting shots here, let's open it up to the floor and see if we have any questions from this group that's been complimented so many times.
Are they awake?
Yes.
I hear what you were saying about economic equality and how economic equality is one of the main, I guess, issues that civil rights advocates really need to grapple with. And our generation right now is going through such a period of wealth stripping, and specifically in communities of color, equity has just been completely pillaged, just taken from them so much. And it feels like it's so tied with this too big to fail banks. Because when you really think about it, when you used to have, you know, your small community bank that you would lend from, it's a different kind of environment than when you're lending from HSBC, who's laundering money for terrorists and things like that. It's how do you, or what does this, I mean, how can civil rights advocates grapple both with this too big to fail politician and, you know, banker is like having this relationship as much as they are grappling with trying to build equity for communities?
Okay, it's a pretty big question. Hezekiah?
Either any of us can answer it.
Sure, but you had your hand up.
It's the same thing like when we were in law school, and you guys know this. If you twitch,
I'm sorry.
That's it. I'll follow.
Professor Carrington back there is going to call on you.
Dean Carrington was good for that, wasn't he? Well, he was Dean when I was here. So.
Okay.
They messed me up because they told me one of the professors never calls on black women.
Not true.
Okay?
Sparks?
That was Sparks.
Sparks, right? Sparks,
right?
See, how do we know that?
You don't have to worry about it. He never calls on the black students. I said, oh, good.
First day?
First day.
First day? You know why that's funny? Then this is an aside. I'm just add some leverage to it. Why that's funny is because that message was passed to all the classes.
Right.
I was in Professor Sparks' property section. First day, he had a little roll sheet. Looked out the sheet. He looked around to identify me as the only black kid in the class. He looked around. I was in the corner. He looked at everybody and he stopped. Looked back. What's your name again? But anyway, to address, I think there are a number of ways to deal with that. And it kind of depends upon your perspective as a lawyer, where you come from with that. If you're in a position where you can develop policy and other kind of stuff and interface with systems where policy is being developed at the top, like my friend here might be, she has one response to it. I'm in a different posture. I really am on the ground trying cases. And I would tell you, my firm right now, we have nationwide 15 or 16 lawsuits where we've sued the same bankers and other entities that you're talking about to try to force them to sort of replenish and repay and give some of that back to those individual communities, and in some situations to force them to give money back to municipalities and counties to sort of recreate the equity that's been stripped from these communities. And sometimes it's innovative and it's new age law because there's nothing on the books that really supports us in doing it. But we've had some success in getting past the various motions and et cetera to get us kicked out of court. And we've had them, in a couple of cases, settle cases to sort of reinvigorate communities because they don't want either the financial or the social political stress associated with the lawsuit. So we've done some things like that on a personal level. And when I said to you before that it really doesn't, you really don't see the impact of what you do unless you affect people in the real world. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. We can go to Congress and get them to try to change another bill. Somebody comes in right behind us in the lobby and changes it back. But if I get them in court and get them by the, and get a little pressure on them and create some firm, formative, substantive change, and believe it or not, the corporation, substantive change is to change how they do business and to hit them right here. I mean, I say that, man. People don't like when you say that. But when you're talking about...
Don't look at me.
I know you like it. But when you talk about the equity involved in stripping communities, you got to find a way to force them to put it back.
Another way is on the ground level dealing with smaller communities, nonprofits,
right,
and try to have them work with those businesses that may use a tax write-off to work with them. I've worked with a number of nonprofits in Durham, homeless shelter, community centers, and tried to get grants for them to do certain programs for those individuals, especially young people in the community. So that's different areas being creative. I can't work with corporations, but I can work with the nonprofit groups. Find out what your niche is. And let me tell you something. You all can volunteer. in the Durham community. I'm going to make a pitch now, Dean. We have enough programs in Durham that need to see people like you, for our young people. I don't need to see them in my office as much as I do. When they come to my office, they're in trouble with the law. I want to make sure they have models that they can look at, and they don't have to come in my office, that they have opportunities other than what's on the street.
You know, your question points up, I mean, not leaving it to others to decide what the policies of this country are. And what I see happening is, you know, folks see members of Congress, people in government, people in corporations, and they don't see the other people who are behind that. And so who writes our laws? And folks, it's easy to say, well, lobbyists write the law. We don't write the laws. There are people who look just like you and me, and most times they don't look like you or me, who write the laws. And they are not, their experiences, everyone brings to everything they do their life experiences. That's right. And I never question people's motives. I can point to what I think the outcome will be of what you do, but I don't question their motives because, again, if I come and prejudge you and say, well, I believe because you're doing this, it's because of this, and that. I mean, I'm questioning a whole bunch of things about you that will inevitably not allow us to be able to get to where I think we need to get to. So if you want to talk about financial institutions, I mean, you're really talking about the capitalist system. Yeah. I mean, banks have shareholders, and the leadership of the organization know who they're accountable to, and that's their shareholders. If they don't make a certain number or profit for that shareholder, they're not going to be in that leadership position. Mm-hmm. So they're driven by that. Now, that's the value system that is capitalism. You want to change that, you got to change that. But that's the system, and that can be not just in financial services and energy. I mean, when I was here, and I didn't go look it up, I probably should have, but you know, when I was here, gas did not cost almost $4. You know, it was $1 something. Well, why in 17 years have we gone from $1.23 to whatever? You know, folks will say, well, supply and demand. I mean, well, okay, you also said that there's also a theory that the United States is producing more oil and gas than it's ever produced in the history of our country. Well, that points to me that there's more supply. Why is it not? Why are prices going down? Again, people have to challenge these notions, and they have to be involved in the process. You know, the issues the issues and challenges that the country has are not necessarily being addressed by their political leaders, and that's everybody.
That's the problem.
And we are the masses. I mean, we have to demand our elected officials, you know, address the issues we want them to address. Otherwise, they won't. I mean, I tell people now, I used to work for the Congressional Black Caucus, of which the President of the United States was a member. Every Wednesday from 12 to 2, members of the Congressional Black Caucus meet. When then Senator Obama was as a member of the caucus, he would come to those lunch meetings, and when there are votes, the House folks would go vote, and if there wasn't a Senate vote, he would sit there and talk about, you know, whatever he was working on and the like. And he told a story about the first time we went to go see President Bush, and his theory on this, which is fascinating, and was, you know, look, the president's not going to do anything unless he has to do anything. If he is not compelled to do something, he will not do it. That same way with President Obama now, who's sitting in the chair. If he's not compelled to do it, he's not going to do it. I mean, so he's not going to address the issues that you may think are important or others may think important unless he is compelled to do it. Same thing with the leadership in the Congress. So that's a macro statement, not necessarily on your specific question, but I think it goes to every issue that we could talk about, whether it's homelessness, criminal justice, and down the line of issues.
At the end of this Supreme Court term in late June, I went down to the Supreme Court on the advice of our PR people to await the decision and to comment on different decisions that were coming down from the court that last week. We knew everything had to come down because they were leaving. And, of course, that Monday before, the Arizona versus ITCA case had come down, in which the Lawyers Committee was counsel. And we had, won that case. And I had predicted this order, that the cases would come down, the ITCA would come down first, Fisher would come down second, Shelby, last, the DOMA and Prop 8. And I had predicted the order of the cases, and I got it right, and my staff, anyway, they owe me money, but anyway, we all, but standing on that Monday when Fisher came down, I'm, running around talking to, like 30 cameras, 30, different, reporters, radio, TV, all kind of stuff. And Fox Business News asked to speak to me. And so I walk up to Fox Business News and they say, okay, what do you think about this case, decision, how do you interpret it, and what do you think is the interest? And I said, well, the most important aspect of the fight in our country over affirmative action and over promoting racial diversity, through education, employment, is in essence a fight over our economic global competition. And they looked at me like, what did she say? And I said, listen, let's take the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Hottest economies in the world right now. I said, if you look at them and you analyze their policies, you'll see Brazil has a strong, new, huge emphasis under, Joseph on affirmative action. In fact, their Supreme Court, just last year upheld affirmative action and endorsed it strongly, totally on grounds that our U.S. Supreme Court would never consider, and would in fact say is invalid, because they uphold it on the grounds of the legacy of slavery, the continuing impacts, the vestiges, the clear inequalities that still exist in Brazil, and so they have it. I said, Russia. So they have, various kinds of, interesting targeted policies. I said, but then you get into India. India has the strongest affirmative action policies in the world. And they are designed to do caste breaking. And they are very strong. I mean, they are some of the best policies in the world, followed by Malaysia and some other countries. I said, and you look at China, it has, policies designed for, promotion and advancement of minorities in certain ways, and in certain ways they are very interesting. I said in South Africa, one of the greatest things I've ever done in my career was to participate in the writing of the South African Constitution, which I think is a better constitution than ours, by the way. And there are some other countries that I think can compete with us pretty heavily in their constitutional basis. But one of the things that we wrote into that Constitution was the constitutionality of what's called positive action, that's affirmative action. So I said, so out of the hottest economies in the world, the majority have some form of affirmative action policy. I said, so the United States, by isolating itself and calling into question and possibly, in the future reversing affirmative action, puts its entire economic global competition at stake. No, they looked at me. Fox said, well, thank you. And interestingly, they called up our PR people the next day and said, listen, we want to book her more, because we want to hear, this is really different. And of course, the next week, some of their worst anchors called and said, oh, we want to see her. They want to fight. But I'm very selective about what I do because I don't believe in just nonsense on TV. My point, my overall point is that I think that if there's one area where there's not enough creative thinking going on, and where there's a need for more policy analysis and more even litigation, because we do a lot of this kind of work. The Lawyers Committee actually has a community economic development project that is totally transactional. And what we do in that project is we build clinics, we build housing, we build factories, we build employment opportunities, we look at food deserts, we tack these forms of structural inequality. And I think that, and my folks keep coming up with ideas, and as the law firms get more involved, they keep coming up with ideas. Lastly, uneasy alliances. The reality of the Lawyers Committee, because of who we are, because we, are the, one of the largest pro bono networks in the world, not to mention in this country, and because we work with all the major law firms, we also have, deep corporate connections. So the banks are an interesting group to deal with, because we're very pro, the Consumer Finance, Consumer Protection Bureau. We're very pro, regulation. We've been, after, loan scams, after, predatory lending, after all these things. And at the same time, they feel compelled to support us. So it's an interesting, dynamic and kind of, an interesting fight. But we've been able to move. I was really pleased. I was just writing our board book and finishing up because our board meeting is coming up and next week. And we actually looked at the fact that we, went into New Orleans and did some serious title clearing for New Orleans and Mississippi, and we moved about $10 million worth of, a property into the hands of property owners that would otherwise have been lost, and done a whole lot of other stuff. I mean, we moved, like millions and millions, like $175 million in the last 2 years just in Mississippi alone. So it does require, there's no problem that man has created that man's not capable of addressing, but you got to put the energy into it, and you got to put the resources.
Well, that was fantastic. Will all of you commit to coming back 50 years from now? I take that to be a yes. Thank you, panel.
The only person that might come back is Paul.
Paul may come
Paul might be.
My baby will be back.
We don't know what they're
I
going
might be living around.
So it might be longer. Hi there.
I thought you said you. Oh, so good to see you. Yes. I'm going to go.